What considers itself to be at the center of the world, the Middle Country, one of the foremost ancient civilizations characterized with military conquest and trade, internal conflict, and technological advancements, has withstood the erosion of time. Beijing, now the capital of China, for nearly 700 years, continues to stand in glory alongside the modern and ancient. A city that industrialized in less than 100 years, a rising power in the 20th century, has been disproving the false accusations of communism while building socialism with Chinese characteristics, as well as institutionalizing a sense of democracy. The metropolis grows around the ancient Forbidden City, growing at a new rate unmatched to what the world has ever seen both technologically, economically, and militarily, while retaining ancient traditions. While ambitious leadership is led by President Xi Jinping, ministers of foreign affairs and leaders of other sectors have come to realize their president's ambitions. Projects such as the One Belt Road Initiative and the construction of artificial islands in the South China Sea represent the country's vision of surpassing many neighboring countries. In addition, the country's representatives of the 56 different ethnic groups have a chance to voice their minds during the National People's Congressional Meeting, which are held annually, highlighting the democratic side of China. As Napoleon once stated, "Let China sleep, for when she wakes, she will shake the world." Today, an ambitious China has realized its role in growing powerful regionally. Underdeveloped cities in the West are now growing at a rapid pace. Poverty alleviation and housing have continued to develop, and even technologies such as powerful nuclear power plants and quantum computing have been developed. The central government is now even proposing to build a new city north of Beijing called Xiong'an. It will be a new green city, a technological hub, and an economically balanced center. Hello, my name is Gabriel Lee, and as a researcher, the purpose of this documentary is to address how China's influence in East Asia has led to fear within American society today. I will be observing the past and the present, comparing different relationships China has had with different countries, as well as more modern examples. This background knowledge will build up and ultimately reveal the answer as to why America fears China. For centuries, China has had friendly relations with Japan and Korea. However, these relations flourished the most during the Tang Dynasty, the golden age of China where innovation prospered. Korea has long established trade routes with China, and thus have been able to adopt many Chinese practices of bronze making, coinage, architecture methods, agricultural practices, and even script writing. These proved to be major foundations within Korea, which helped to promote a new culture. During the Warring States period, a part of Chinese history filled with betrayal and chaos, and split kingdoms, there was still an incentive for education. Many kingdoms sent scholars and diplomats to Korea in exchange for peace and alliances in order to strengthen the state. Soon after the Warring States period, the Han, Sui, and Tang dynasties were formed one after another in sequential order. These three kingdoms marked the beginning of Chinese domination within the Korean peninsula. The Han first proved successful in establishing 4 military districts in Korea. The Sui sent an invasion force of 300,000 men to conquer, but were repelled. However, this humiliation was soon overcome when the Tang ultimately conquered the peninsula ruled by the Empire of Goguryeo and made Korea into a vassal state. After this downfall came the birth of the Silla Kingdom. They maintained close relations with the Tang by paying tribute, and even sent students to China to learn more about Chinese culture. For instance, the adoption of Tang court practices and religions, including Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Japan has kept its reputation of being in power alongside China for many decades. Its first foreign influence came from China during the 300 BCE. The country learned methods of agriculture such as rice plantation and soybean cultivation, as well as soy sauce brewing. Relations began to strengthen between China and Japan during the Asuka period. Trade greatly increased, which led to cultural exchange. Tea ceremonies, eating etiquette, and court etiquette, just to name a few, were all adopted by the Japanese in order to seem more civilized in the eyes of China and Korea. Japan also sent students and monks to learn about Taoism and Buddhism. Before the fall of the Sui dynasty, yes, the same one that had sent an invasion force of 300,000 men to conquer the Korean peninsula, Japan wanted to develop diplomatic relations with the dynasty. Embassies were sent to the Sui court, which allowed for more cultural exchange. During this period, Chinese arts of acupuncture, architecture, and music were adopted. The influence Chinese architecture had on Japanese society was profound, and to today, remnants of ancient influences can still be seen in Japan's city of Kyoto. It is important to note that Buddhism in fact did not sprout from China, but was developed by Siddhartha Gautama, an Indian monk. Buddhism came to China by the Silk Road from India during the Han Dynasty. This historical knowledge, hopefully by now, will have let you, as viewers, see how mutually beneficial all three countries were to one another. Coming to observe modern day today, it is evident that Japan, Korea, and China now have hatred stemming from one another, a fragile relationship. An ancient China that once had many territorial claims has also lost a great deal of land. And because of this, modern China seeks to reunify the country. The Japanese Senkaku Islands are debated whether they belong to China or Japan. The century-old question of whether Taiwan should be returned to the motherland or not. And the blatant claims China has made about claiming the South China Sea as its own territorial waters. Connecting these facts to a growing navy, America fears that Chinese influence in the region will continue to grow. America's concern is, if the Chinese take control of the first island chain, a great disruption will be felt on sea trade routes, and a new world order will rise in which the world will no longer see America as being number one. Since the beginning of high school, I have become more self-aware of my own culture, as well as becoming more fascinated with political relationships China has had with neighboring countries. Actively searching for answers, I decided to ask my parents, who are both immigrants from China, and they told me that the country has had tremendous cultural impacts on both Japan and Korea. Unsure about these facts, I decided to interview some international friends of mine from China to help me answer this question better. Here are some of their responses. These next three responses come from three friends of mine from southern China. The first response is 影响最大的就是日本和韩国，除此之外还有一些东南亚国家。日本的和服和韩国的韩服都是源于中国古代的汉服服饰，包括韩文和日文也是受到了汉字的影响。Translated into English, she basically stated that China has influenced Japan and Korea in great ways. Japanese kimonos and Korean hanboks, traditional clothings, were influenced by Han Dynasty clothing. And in addition to this, Chinese characters also greatly influenced Japanese script writing and Korean script writing. The second response I received was 古代中国影响到了日本、韩国等国家，现在中国其实可以说是和这个世界上各个国家互相影响，因为这个世界越来越成为一个不可分割的命运共同本，都在共同发展，互相帮助。So basically, what his statement was, ancient China influenced Japan and Korea and other neighboring countries. However, he has a more modern view, which is Modern China is actually now influencing many more countries because as this world becomes more united as one, all countries are industrializing and economizing, and as a result, all countries find a way to help each other. And as such, China has found its path to help countries industrialize and help its different countries' people if needed, or help different countries' citizens when needed. The last response I received was 古代中国的影响范围广泛，尤其在东南亚、日本、韩国、越南等国家几乎面搬运中国的制度文化，而日本派前学者到中国学习文化制度后，几乎全面搬运去日本。但是并没有影响到美洲、欧洲、非洲。So, my friend here, he basically said that ancient Chinese influences had a large radial influence, especially in Southern Asia and Eastern Asia, including Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, and some other smaller countries. So all of these countries basically adopted Chinese culture, and most specifically Japanese. They sent students to China to learn about Chinese culture and ultimately brought it back to their own country. And after some time, he also stated that Chinese culture, however, did not influence American, European, or African culture. China's first step on the power ladder came during the Korean War. The war officially started on June 25, 1950, when North Korea invaded the South, crossing the 38th parallel, overwhelming many settlements as if they adopted Germany's blitzkrieg tactic. The UN Security Council immediately assembled a military contingent. An alliance of 22 countries joined together to fight back the communist regime led by Kim Il-sung. North Korea captured Seoul in just 3 days. However, they faced greater retaliation from UN military led by General MacArthur. 2 months later, in September 1950, the UN military alliance conducted a risky counter-offensive in Incheon and drove the North Koreans back. Continuing this momentum, American-led forces were ultimately able to invade the north, coming close to the Yalu River, the borderline between North Korea and China. Not willing for an American invasion force to step into Chinese grounds, China joined the war on October 19, fighting against a force much more powerful against its own. It still managed to push back the UN forces somehow. Most impressively, it fought continuously, forming a military stalemate with the most powerful army the world had perceived during that time, even till today. Prior to the war, China had been in the midst of a civil revolution, in which America supported nationalist China's fight against communist China because it viewed it as the Red Menace. Military supplies and economic help were delivered in order to alleviate the nationalist cause against the communists. However, in the end, communist China was victorious. This humiliated America because not only had it lost a possible ally for democracy, it angered many people in the country, seeing that the Truman administration had not supported nationalist China to the certain degree it needed. The Truman administration saw communism as an existential threat to democracy. Therefore, they saw it as the American duty to preserve natural human freedoms and spread democracy. Even before the Truman presidency, President Woodrow Wilson stated that democracy was not the principles of a province or of a single continent. We have known and boasted all along that they were the principles of a liberated mankind. Impressing this imagery into the minds of American citizens and Western allies, it becomes evident that America wants to police the world to preserve natural human rights. Failure in America's aid towards nationalist China and, and military support in the Korean War shows mismanagement and continued communism, and has allowed for China's regional influence to grow exponentially. Post-World War II, and after the Chinese Nationalist Party settled on the island of Formosa, more commonly known as Taiwan, questions would be raised which would be a decisive factor between US-China relations for decades to come. On February 21st, the Nixon administration paid a visit to the PRC, meeting top leaders such as Premier Zhou Enlai and the famous dictator Mao Zedong, which became known as the Shanghai Communique. Both sides held talks on key ideas, such as how stronger countries should treat other smaller ones, and ways to uphold international order. Eventually, China and the US recognized the need for freedom, social progress, and communication as key in sustaining relations with other countries. Representatives from both sides also agreed that countries have the right to determine territorial integrity and sovereignty, as well as safeguard against foreign aggression. Clear examples of this include the India-Pakistan conflict, in which America and China had voiced for troops from respective sides to withdraw behind the Jammu and Kashmir borderlines. Ironically, in our modern times, when it is evident that both countries have begun to assert dominance in a multitude of areas around the world, they initially agreed to stop political hegemony. However, it now depends on the extent to which China and America violate their own agreements. During the peace talks, the question of Taiwan was brought to light. China, formidable in its argument, insisted that America withdraw its military forces, that the government of the PRC is the sole government of Taiwan, and that Taiwan is an internal affair in which no other country has the right to interfere. America agreed to these terms. It went further as to not challenge the Chinese position. As stated by the US, it reaffirms its interest in peaceful settlement of the Taiwan question by the Chinese themselves. This would later become known as the One China policy. Now, in the 21st century, America has not kept its word. In the past decade, military pacts have been formed between the island nation and America, and immense weapons have been sold in order to promote democratic order in Taiwan in hopes to push back against communist influence, and to show that Taiwan has the capability to become an independent nation. Former Secretary of Defense for International Affairs Cass Freeman even said that US arms sales to Taiwan no longer work to boost Taipei's confidence that it can work out its differences with Beijing. Instead, they bolstered the view that Taiwan could go on its own way, which is an explicit violation of the One China principle. Why would America go against its word? Clearly, it wants Taiwan to become an independent nation. In 1995, President of Taiwan Lee Teng-hui visited America, which reinforced the idea of a free Taiwan. Not only did the island nation establish an American style of election, it seeks America to help it in its course to fight for democracy. In the eyes of the motherland, it views America's actions as trying to frustrate its own goals of reunifying the whole of China. Taiwan acts as a gateway for many major shipping routes and a great seaport. If China were to take over Taiwan, it is one step closer to taking over the first island chain, which includes the Kuril Islands, the Japanese archipelago, Okinawa, a part of the Philippine archipelago, the Malay Peninsula, and Taiwan. fear of Chinese control over shipping routes and the collapse of another free government are what spurs America to back Taiwan militarily. The question of Taiwan's independence continues to be a focal point between Chinese-American relations. However, I find it interesting that these two countries contain people of the same heritage, but due to disagreement between social ideologies, they have become cutthroat towards one another. Now, coming from an American standpoint of view, I can easily understand why the American government continues to look after Taiwan. Looking at this situation from a feminist lens, a patriarchal view, if I were considered the father of democracy, surely I would protect my own and not allow others to put their hands on my quote-unquote child. However, looking for broader perspectives, I seeked out a friend of mine who lives near Shanghai, as well as a Chinese friend from Virginia to compare and contrast their views coming from different countries. So this first response comes from my friend in Shanghai, and what he said was 一个中国。我举个例子，你们的德克萨斯州要独立，你们会同意吗？ So basically, this response basically states that he believes in the One China policy. He provided me with a counter-argument stating that if Texas wanted to become independent once more, would we as Americans agree to that statement? And I replied, probably not. So, and thinking about this question, and as a high school student who took APUSH and learning that we conquered those southern territories that were once a part of Mexico, if we were to give back Texas, firstly, it would decrease the size of our country greatly, and secondly, it could disturb some societal norms, or even damage our societal integrity. And in response to my answer, he said that the situation between China and Taiwan are essentially the same, because since ancient times till modern times, Taiwan has been an inalienable part of China. So it is the goal of the Chinese people to maintain their societal integrity and maintain the lands that once belonged to them. The second response came from my friend in Virginia, and he stated that 我觉得吧，可能会引起一些争端，因为台湾本来就是中国的一部分，但他们一直以为他们是自己的国家，觉得跟美国走得近就能做些事。So basically, he also believes in the One China policy, and that he believes that if Taiwan were to become independent, there would be a large conflict between China and Taiwan, and possibly allies of Taiwan as well. But an important point he stated was that Taiwan wants to become independent, wants to be their own country, form their own democracy, because by doing so, they believe that they can be closer to America, and that would bring them some benefits that weren't present if they were to be a part of communist China. Now in the modern era, more than anything, economy seems to play an even more important role than the military. It is the economic foundation that allows a country to hold a powerful military. As America remains the top economic country in the world, it has shown the world the might and patriotism of the American people. Having established multiple military bases abroad, establishing the World Bank and IMF, it shows what the American economic system is capable of. The world currently revolves around the system of US currency. It is the currency of international trade. Not to mention, many other forms of money are backed by the US dollar. This financial power allows America to influence the economics of the world and use it for its own benefit. However, in the recent decades, China has slowly started catching up with America at an increasing rate. The growth of a rising Chinese economy gives way to more potential opportunities of a military conflict between America and China. As stated by Denny Roy, an author who holds a PhD in political science who writes about Northeast Asian political issues, a stronger, wealthier China would have greater wherewithal to increase its arsenal of nuclear-armed ICBMs and to increase their lethality through improvements in range, accuracy, and survivability. If China continues its rate of economic expansion, absolute growth in Chinese nuclear capabilities should be expected to increase. These nuclear arms would most likely be used to flex regional dominance instead of being used abroad, protecting the regional interests of the country. China had once suffered 100 years of humiliation in which 8 foreign powers came to plunder. A weak Qing government had no power to stop thieves in their footsteps. As China's economy grows powerful once more, America fears China will regain political and cultural dominance in East Asia, just as it had done in ancient times. Knowing that Chinese culture is heavily influenced by the parabellum paradigm, a belief that warfare is a common thread in international relations, the country will always be on high military alert. In addition, neighboring countries may also become increasingly more dependent on Chinese imports. Underdeveloped countries may even look up to China for help in order to develop their own economies. In Obama's 2015 State of Union address, he proposed that China wants to write the rules for the world's fastest growing region. That would put our workers and businesses at a disadvantage. Why would we let that happen? We should write the rules. Fearing that Chinese businesses will soon have market dominance, it is evident that America seeks to suppress the growth of China. Already, China has become an integral part of Taiwan, Korea, and Japan's production lines, which means that these 3 countries have moved factories to China so production is cheaper. However, if China were to ever suffer from economic sanctions, all these countries will also feel the pressure imposed upon China, as foreign markets within the country will also slowly be crippled. Observing a recent study conducted in 2021 by Pew Research, roughly 73% of Americans have a negative perception of China, a gigantic growth of 38% in just 16 years since 2005. Of the 73%, 63% reported fearing a growing Chinese economy. Yet another study conducted by Morning Consult, a data intelligence firm, reported that over 2,200 adults saw China as a threat in technology and innovation sectors. In 2019 alone, China had filed more international patents than America. In order to deter Chinese dominance, America plays blissfully with its own vocabulary. Interestingly, whenever the Chinese borrow an idea without permission, not saying that it's a good thing to do so, America calls it intellectual property theft, whereas if it were in America, it would be called patent infringement, which seems to be on a less serious scale. From an economic and technological standpoint, it's obvious that the United States refuses to see a large growth in China. Not only will it be displaced from the globe as number one, the big brother to other countries, it will also enter a stage of insecurity as its power of preserving democracy on a worldwide scale slowly diminishes. Living in such a powerful country, it is rare to see anyone openly declaring that they are afraid of China. Most agree that it is a plausible reason to perceive China as a threat. However, there is no need to be in a state of fear. Aside from what the sources told me, I again searched for answers, so I asked my friends once more to receive their input. The first response was, 所以美国害怕中国会成为世界第一大经济体制，取代美国在世界霸主的位置，成为第一大经济体制国。So basically, she stated that America fears China because it is possible that in the near future, China will replace America as the most powerful economic country in the world, economically advantageous country. So this next response comes from a Texan friend of mine. He basically stated that it is possible that America fears China solely because of communism, and he also added something very interesting called the domino theory. So I didn't know what it was, so I went online and searched it up. And the domino theory basically states that a political event that happens in one country may spread to neighboring countries. So it's like a domino effect. And that's sort of like related to communism, because China has already begun to spread its communistic and socialistic aspects of its society to neighboring countries, which America greatly fears because they believe it can cause regional instability. This next response of mine comes from a friend who lives in the Philippines. He states that America might be afraid of China because of the Chinese debt trap. China helps other countries by letting them borrow money from them, but the interest of such debt is high. The second reason why America somehow fears China is because of its alliance with Russia. China already overcame poverty, but on the other hand, some of the Americans are still suffering from famine and starvation. America fears China because America sees China aiming for global dominance. Now, most of his statements I agree with. However, China has not already overcome poverty. It has alleviated much of its population from poverty, but not completely. And I do agree with him that some Americans, they are still suffering from famine and starvation, which leads me to think, shouldn't America focus on their own problems first before trying to interfere in other countries' problems? So I find that pretty interesting. So that continues to play into the aspect of why America fears losing its number one place in the world, because China is doing so many things to displace America from its position. This next recording comes from a friend of mine who lives in Finland, and here's what he has to say about why America may fear China.
我觉得美国会害怕中国在影响中国那个东方，很有可能是把中国壮大起来，然后就超越美国，然后就没有美国的什么事，中国就可以是世界老大。
So basically what he just said was that as China grows more powerful, its influence in the East will undoubtedly rise. So America fears this because this is exactly what will displace America from its number one position. And he uses a term 老大, and in Chinese that means big brother. So America will lose its role as the world's big brother while China replaces America's role. Now to end this interview session, one of my friends actually brought up a really interesting point. He in fact thinks that there is no such thing as American fear, and this was his response. 我认为不存在怕与不怕这个说法，因为中国是个特别友善的国家，不会无缘无故的去伤害别的国家。还没有真正了解中国的国家和百姓，我们的态度使用正面积极的行动去改变他们的想法，但不会使用暴力或者不正当的手段。So his response was basically saying that he doesn't believe in what this concept of fear, but rather he believes that China is a very friendly nation. China doesn't really go up to other countries and to disturb them or cause internal conflict, but rather those countries who do not fully believe in China yet and its citizens, China will use upright methods in order to change their outlooks and perspectives. And his final affirmations were that China will not use 暴力, which was force, or unfair advantages to change the mindsets of people. Everyone has grown to understand and perceive that human rights are something only democratic countries have in common. Any other type of social systems will have less of it. As stated in the UN Declaration for Human Rights, 3 major points were made. First, freedom from physical abuse. Secondly, rights to goods and services. Third, individual action, freedom of expression, and a natural right to democracy. Democracy does not necessarily have to be institutionalized, as some may think, but rather it is a natural right given to people. Meaning that if someone were to live in China, they can experience the same amount of democratic rights someone has in America, but under a meritocracy instead of a full-on democratic form of government. China has already given its people many rights in natural services and goods that must be highlighted. Since the early 2000s till now, China has alleviated nearly 750 million people out of its underdeveloped areas and has even taken steps to slowly modernize these slums, such as housing renovations, installment of more modern technology, and access to fresh water. Natural facts such as these are what Western media do not have access to, but instead they manipulate simple facts and say China is violating human rights without providing concrete evidence. Now, in the eyes of the current Chinese government, President Xi Jinping stated that other natural rights include the right to avoid social disorder. China has had an issue with domestic terrorism since the early 90s from Islamic radicals, specifically the Uyghurs. The country took necessary steps to quell insurrections and resorted to nonviolent methods. Comparing this to America's 20-year war in the Middle East against terrorism, it had little to no impact on the situation while losing many resources and troops. Yes, for a heroic and dire situation, but at the cost of innumerable lives. A mismanagement of war at the fault of the American government shows the world a major insecurity within the democratic government. As China continues to grow, its sphere of influence also increases, and soon enough, American dominance in the Pacific and possibly the whole of East Asia will then be non-existent. For every step China takes as it advances into its future, America loses its grip in the Pacific theater and back at home. A growing economy soon to be 4 times as large as America's, it is no wonder why the United States fears a powerful China. Economy is the heart of a country, which means with a strong economic system, naturally, there will exist a strong military, prospering cities, but most importantly, happy citizens. A combination of these 3 aspects serve to power a country with influential power. Now in the modern day, it is already evident seeing Chinese influence within the Pacific region and the Middle East, stretching all the way to the borders of Europe. The goal of this documentary was to build up specific examples of America's sphere and hopefully have it snowball on top of one another in order to prove the essence of American terror. But ultimately, what I really hope is that this research can shine light upon how different countries can use different methods of social systems, yet still be effective in their own ways. Only when countries recognize this fact can there be true peace between countries and prosperity between different groups of people. As this documentary comes to an end, my identity as a Chinese American is also left behind for viewers to see in the future. This project has allowed me to express my own concerns about the development of peace between countries and provide information on where things originated from. Through this project, I have matured to find a deeper connection and understanding with the American culture I live in while preserving my Chinese heritage. Thank you for watching.